G'day, g'day, g'day. It's another day. This is going to be short and sweet because I don't have a tremendous amount to tell you prior to you watching our film for this week, 1983's Careful He Might Hear You. There's a lot in the film, and I think we're going to have a lively and interesting discussion about it. And I don't want to set it up too much because I think it doesn't need it. You can just walk right into this one and get what you get. But I do want to just point out a few things about it before you watch. So it was directed by Hungarian-Australian director Karl Schulz, and I don't know if you would know of any of his other films, but one of them that was kind of popular in the States, I think it was an American production, was called The Seventh Sign, and it was with Demi Moore, and it was about the rapture and stuff like that. So I suppose you could check that out if you want to. It was okay. It wasn't terrific. Anyway, Careful He Might Hear You, though, is terrific, and that's why you're watching it. The screenplay is by Michael Jenkins, and it's based on a 1963 novel of the same name, Careful He Might Hear You, which was written by Australian-American author Sumner Locke Elliott. And some of you may be familiar with Sumner Locke Elliott. I'll talk a little bit more about that writer. Oh, boy. Talk more about the writer in our discussion. He wrote a lot for the golden age of television, and I think had at least one or two other novels that I'm familiar with. But this novel was quite popular, and there were many people who for a long time wanted to turn it into a film. And then finally in 1983, Jill Robb, who was one of the rare female producers working in the 80s. There weren't a lot of women producers. It was kind of a laughable idea. She got the property, and the rest is sort of history, and they turned it into this really gorgeous film. But I want to tell you a little bit about the book author more than anybody else connected to the project. So Sumner Locke Elliott was born in Sydney in 1917 to a celebrated writer, Sumner Locke. Now that's his mother, so he shares his mother's first name. And she was married to the journalist Henry Logan Elliott. Now, Careful He Might Hear You is very autobiographical. There are some elements that were changed. I didn't read the novel, but the film, there were some elements that are different from the real life story, but it is considered an autobiographical film. And sort of the background is, in real life, Sumner Elliott's mother, Sumner, died about one day after he was born, and Elliott was thereafter raised by his aunts, who had a fierce custody battle over him, and that is the story that is fictionalized in our film today. And in fact, you'll even find some variations of Sumner's parents' names in the film. There is a character named Logan, which was Sumner's father's middle name, or they have those double last names. I can't think of what that's called right now. And then Sumner in the film, his mother is named Sinden. So there are some similarities in that way. This film is considered one of the major releases of the Australian film Renaissance, which was just flooding the US market in the late 70s and early 80s. You can still consider it part of the Australian New Wave, although the elements of this film differ a great deal from some of that earlier work from the 1970s. Hi, Dean. Sit down. Thank you. Sorry about the behind shot. Hope that wasn't horrible. Please sit, darling. Please sit. Thank you. Okay, so it was really, this film was quite popular when it came out in the States. In fact, my own father showed it to me. There was a pay cable television service, if some of you remember, early one called On TV, and it came out on TV probably in 1983 or maybe 84, but right around there. So I would have been about 14 years old, and my father loved this film, and in fact he bought the soundtrack album to it. And I will tell you, the soundtrack of the film is also considered a major classic of Australian film soundtrack canon. there is such a thing. They do have enough films to have classic film soundtracks, just like we do. So anyway, he introduced me to it, as he did many, many other films. In fact, I would just shout out to my dad, who loved film, and he was the one that showed me The Last Wave, and so many other things that I share with you came from him introducing me to them. So thanks, Dad. Anyway, there, as I said, this was really well known, and all of the Australian films coming out at that time still are known by famous directors, and they still cite them as early influences on their own work, even if maybe you don't see it in some of their final product, like this clip from Quentin Tarantino from just a few years ago, talking about some of the Australian films that he loved.
And I guess one of the things that I always really responded to in Australian cinema is they seem to be made up of the same two parents. Because whenever the Australian genre flicks, whenever the exploitation movies played in America, they were never advertised as Australianism. In fact, they tried to ignore that as much as possible. And so, like stuff like Patrick or Mad Max or Road Warrior and Road Games and all those movies came out. They were what they were. However, I also lived through that big explosion of Australian cinema in the late 70s, early 80s. That was like My Brilliant Career and The Last Wave and The Getting of Wisdom and Breaker Morant. And there was just something really evocative about those movies. And even at the video store that I worked at, Video Archives, we had a big giant foreign section that was broken down into different countries. And our Australian section was one of the most populated in the 80s because people really, really liked the Australian movies. And they got to know who the actors were, and so Careful He Might Hear You would run a bunch of times because people saw something with John Hargreaves or saw something with Wendy Hughes and they wanted to see more. And so I guess that's one of the things that I like is the two dichotomies that exist, but nevertheless, the same actors move back and forth.
Okay, so I don't know how much more I'm going to tell you, but we can talk more about the story of this young boy who is at the center of this very complex and oftentimes sort of harrowing tale. And I do want to tell you that you will find as you travel through this Depression-era childhood remembrance with our protagonist, P.S., who is played by the remarkable 7-year-old Nicholas Gledhill in his film debut, this story grows deeper and more psychologically complex than at first blush. So when you first start watching it, you might think, oh, okay, it's one of those films. It's not one of those films, trust me. It goes a lot further than you might think, and maybe that you might be comfortable with at times, but just, stick with it. Nothing ever goes too far, but there are suggestions of things that, it will give you pause, certainly. And really one of the strongest elements of this film is that, for the most part, it is told from the point of view of the young child. And, there's a few scenes that occur without him in them and that sort of give us backstory to characters and whatnot. But mostly it's from his point of view, and that's really when the film is its strongest. And in fact, the entire film, I think, has many wonderful elements that are that keep it solid and interesting, but I would say that the performances are really the linchpin in the film. Certainly Nicholas Gledhill, as I mentioned. There is a flurry of supporting characters who enrich every scene, including a man who is considered one of Australia's national treasures, John Hargreaves, and most of all, there is a stunning and very bold and very courageous performance from the film's antagonist, the iconic Dame Wendy Hughes, who plays one of P.S.'s aunts, and who at first appears to be this sort of old movie star caricature, but soon reveals herself to be highly layered and really a deeply disturbed woman. And she will incite within you feelings of rage at times, but also hopefully ultimately garner our sympathy as well. The cinematography in the film is by the celebrated John Seale, and it's often dazzling and always intimate. And that's something that we kind of saw in some of Seale's later films, such as Witness, Gorilla in the Mist, The English Patient, and the talented Mr. Ripley, among many other films that he worked on. And again, I wanted to point out the very emotive score by Ray Cook, which really powerfully anchors the film in nostalgia. And again, it is considered a classic of Australian film. And I still have the record in my collection. I should buy the CD so that I can play it on my old stereo. Oh no, we're in 2020. I should be down streaming things from Bluetooth. Well, I don't do that all the time. Nonetheless, I think that's it. Careful He Might Hear You was selected as one of the top 10 films for the National Board of Review in 1983, which is quite an honor. And it also, of course, won, not of course, but you would, after you see it, you'll think, of course. It won the Australian Film Award for Best Film, Best Director, Adapted Screenplay, Cinematography, Actress, and Supporting Actor. So it swept the AFI Awards. And I just want to clarify, in my intro to the entire course, I said that the AFI Australian Film Awards were their Oscars, and they were until they changed it around 1986 to be their other kinds of Oscars. I'll put something here maybe. If you care, just know it won a bunch of awards. The highest awards of Australia, that's what it won. What else? Lastly, in 1999, composer Ron Krieger and lyricist David Sale turned the story into a stage musical, which was led by Australian showbiz icon Tony Lamond, and it received tons of great press, and audience reaction was wonderful. Critics loved it. I put a clip from that stage show into our playlist, but I would suggest that you not watch it until after you see the film, and then you can kind of see what they might have done on stage. It's a videotaped clip, so it's sort of old and has a bunch of lines through it, but you can sort of get an idea of maybe what they did. Point being, this is just a very beloved story and film in Australia, and so people tried to do something else with it that they thought might keep the story alive for new audiences as well. And I think that's it. So please enjoy Careful He Might Hear You. It's gorgeous. It's moving. I don't think it's melodramatic. I think it's kind of on point, and I think that you're going to never forget this film. So I will talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye.